The first time I saw my own signature stolen and twisted into a lie, something inside me cracked. It wasn't just ink on paper, it was the final betrayal from the daughter I gave everything to. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. Every morning at 6:15, I wake up in my cramped studio apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. The radiator clanks like an old ghost, reminding me that winter never really leaves this city, even in spring. The smell of coffee from the bodega downstairs mingles with the exhaust fumes that seep through my cracked window. I wrap my worn terry cloth robe around my shoulders and shuffle across the cold linoleum floor to the kitchenette. The kettle whistles its lonely song as I prepare my morning tea. Earl Grey, the same brand my mother used to make when I was young and believed that families stayed together through everything. The steam fogs up the small mirror above my sink, and for a moment, I can't see my reflection. Maybe that's better. These days, I barely recognize the woman staring back at me anyway. My phone sits silent on the scratched wooden table by the window. No missed calls, no text messages, no voicemails. Just the blue light of the home screen mocking me with its emptiness. 3 days ago, I was supposed to attend my daughter Sarah's birthday celebration. I had bought a beautiful silk scarf from Bergdorf Goodman, spending money I couldn't really afford, wrapping it carefully in lavender tissue paper. I waited by the phone for the final details, the address, the time. Nothing came. The invitation had arrived 2 weeks earlier through email. "Mom, we'd love to have you join us for Sarah's special day. We'll send details soon." I printed it out and put it on my refrigerator, right next to the photo of Sarah graduating from Columbia. In that picture, she's wearing the cap and gown I scrimped and saved to pay for, her smile radiant with possibility. I worked double shifts at the department store for 3 years to make that education happen. Now that same smile feels like a mask hiding something I'm afraid to name. I remember the weight of her little hand in mine when she was 7, walking through Central Park on autumn afternoons. The leaves crunched under our feet, and she would collect the prettiest ones to press in her journal. "Mommy, look at this one," she'd say, holding up a perfect golden maple leaf. "It's like sunshine fell down just for us." I kept that journal for years until she told me to throw it away when she turned 16. "That's kid stuff, Mom. I'm not a baby anymore." But somewhere in my heart, she still is that little girl collecting leaves. Or maybe she was. Until money and entitlement changed everything. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It crept in slowly, like water damage behind a wall. First, it was small requests. "Mom, could you help with my phone bill this month?" Then it became bigger asks. "I need help with my car payment." Then even bigger. "Mom, my credit cards are maxed out and they're threatening to close my account." Each time, I said yes. Each time, I transferred what I could from my modest savings account, telling myself that this was what mothers do. We sacrifice, we give, we provide. But sacrifice has a way of becoming expectation, and expectation has a way of becoming entitlement. My son Michael was no better. 3 years older than Sarah, he perfected the art of emotional manipulation early. "Why can't you be more supportive, Mom?" he'd ask whenever I questioned his constant need for financial help. Other mothers would do anything for their kids. The accusation stung because I had done everything. I worked until my feet swelled, saved until my own needs became afterthoughts, and gave until my bank account ran dry. Last Christmas, I spent my entire Social Security check on gifts for my 3 grandchildren. Designer toys they barely acknowledged, expensive clothes they outgrew within months. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner throughout January, but I told myself it was worth it to see their faces light up Christmas morning. Except their faces didn't light up. They opened my carefully chosen presents with bored expressions and immediately asked where their iPads and gaming consoles were. "Grandma's gifts are always so practical," Sarah had whispered to Michael, not quietly enough. They laughed together while I stood in the kitchen, pretending I couldn't hear them through the thin apartment walls. My husband Robert, God rest his soul, used to warn me about this. "Helen, you're going to spoil them rotten," he'd say, watching me pack yet another care package to send to the kids when they were in college. They need to learn to stand on their own 2 feet. But Robert had a heart attack 6 years ago, leaving me alone with my generous heart and my stubborn belief that love could be measured in dollars and cents. After the funeral, the kids descended on me like vultures, not to comfort their grieving mother, but to discuss Dad's assets and how they could help me manage everything. Michael appointed himself executor of Robert's modest estate, though I was perfectly capable of handling my own affairs. Sarah suggested I sell the small house in Queens that Robert and I had paid off over 30 years and move into something more manageable in Manhattan. What they really meant was something smaller and cheaper, so there would be more left over for them. I fought them on the house sale for months, but eventually, the property taxes and maintenance became too much on my fixed income. The day I signed those papers, watching strangers walk through rooms where I'd raised my children and loved my husband, I felt something die inside me. The real estate agent handed me a check for $300,000, and I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt hollow. Sarah helped me find the studio apartment on West 87th Street. "It's perfect for you, Mom," she assured me, though the ceiling leaked and the neighbors next door played music until 3 in the morning. "And it's so much closer to everything." What she didn't say was that it was also $200,000 cheaper than what I could have afforded, leaving a nice cushion for future emergencies. Their emergencies. The money went fast. Sarah's emergency dental work that cost $8,000. Michael's investment opportunity that required $15,000 in startup capital. The grandchildren's private school tuition that somehow became my responsibility when Michael's business venture failed. Each withdrawal felt like another piece of my security chipped away, but I told myself this was temporary. They would get back on their feet. They would appreciate everything I'd done. They would take care of me when I got old and frail. How naive I was. The first crack in my denial came last winter when I caught the flu. Not a mild case, but the kind that left me bedridden for 2 weeks with a fever that wouldn't break, and a cough that sounded like it might tear my lungs apart. I called Sarah 3 times, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. "Sweetheart, I'm really sick and could use some help with groceries." Then, "Sarah, I haven't been able to keep food down for days." Finally, "Please call me back. I'm scared." She never called back. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who saved me. She's 82 years old and lives alone in the apartment next door with her 3 cats and a canary named Charlie. She heard me coughing through the thin walls and knocked on my door with a thermos of chicken soup and a hand-knitted quilt. "You eat," she commanded in her broken English, settling the quilt around my shoulders. "You rest. I check on you tomorrow." Mrs. Chen checked on me every day for 2 weeks. She brought soup, she brought tea, she brought company when the fever made me delirious with loneliness. She asked for nothing in return except to know that I was okay. When I finally recovered, I tried to pay her for the groceries she'd bought, but she waved me away with her arthritic hands. "Family helps family," she said. No money between family. The irony wasn't lost on me. A stranger had become more family to me than my own blood. But even then, I made excuses. Sarah was busy with work. Michael had his own family to worry about. They probably didn't realize how sick I was. If I'd been clearer about needing help, surely they would have come. I convinced myself that my expectations were too high, that I was being needy and demanding. The wake-up call came on my 70th birthday in March. I had mentioned it casually to both kids the week before, not wanting to seem pushy but hoping they might remember. "Next Tuesday is my birthday," I'd said during my weekly check-in call with Sarah. "Oh, right," she'd responded distractedly. "The big 7-0. We should definitely do something." Tuesday came and went in silence. No calls, no cards, no flowers. I sat in my apartment watching the clock tick past midnight, officially ending my birthday without a single acknowledgement from my children or grandchildren. I ordered Chinese takeout and ate it alone while watching old reruns of I Love Lucy, the laugh track echoing hollowly in my empty apartment. The next morning, I saw on Sarah's Facebook page that she'd thrown an elaborate party for her friend's birthday the same night. Photos of champagne toasts and designer cakes filled my feed, each image a small knife twisting in my chest. She'd had time to plan a celebration, buy gifts, and gather friends. She just hadn't had time for me. That's when I started to understand that my value in their lives was purely financial. When they needed money, I was indispensable. When they needed love, support, or simple human connection, I was invisible. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Sarah would call with crisis after crisis, each one requiring immediate financial intervention. Her car broke down and needed a $3,000 repair. Her rent was going up, and she needed help with the security deposit for a new apartment. Her boyfriend lost his job, and they were behind on their credit card payments. Each emergency felt urgent, life-altering, impossible to ignore. But when I called with my own small needs, the response was always the same. "Mom, I'm really swamped at work right now. Can we talk later? I'm dealing with my own stuff." "You're being dramatic. It's not that big a deal." Michael perfected a different approach. He made me feel guilty for even having needs. "Mom, you know I'd love to help, but I've got the kids to think about. Sarah doesn't have children. She should be taking care of you." It was a masterful manipulation, pitting his sister against me while absolving himself of any responsibility. When I mentioned this to Sarah, she was furious. "Michael always does this. He dumps everything on me because I don't have kids. It's not fair." So I stopped asking either of them for help with anything. I learned to manage my own emergencies, to cope with my own loneliness, to solve my own problems. But somehow, their emergencies remained my responsibility. The money I'd received from selling the house dwindled steadily. Each month brought new requests, new crises, new reasons why I needed to transfer funds from my savings to their accounts. I started shopping at discount grocery stores, buying generic brands and day-old bread. I canceled my cable subscription and stopped eating at the small diner where Robert and I used to have Sunday breakfast. Every dollar I saved was a dollar I could give to them when they needed it, and they always needed it. By the fall, I was down to my last $30,000 from the house sale. My Social Security barely covered my rent and utilities, leaving almost nothing for food, medication, or basic necessities. I was 70 years old, living in poverty so that my middle-aged children could maintain lifestyles they couldn't afford. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I decided to visit a financial advisor at the local senior center, just to get some guidance on managing my remaining savings. The advisor, a kind woman named Patricia who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, listened to my story with growing alarm. "Mrs. Rodriguez," she said gently, "you're being financially abused. Your children are exploiting your generosity and putting your future security at risk." The words hit me like a physical blow. Financial abuse. I'd heard the term before but never applied it to my own situation. That was something that happened to other people, vulnerable seniors who didn't have loving families to protect them. Patricia helped me open a new savings account at a different bank, one that my children didn't have access to. She showed me how to set up automatic transfers so that a portion of my Social Security would go directly into this protected account each month. "You need to build an emergency fund for yourself," she explained. "You can't take care of anyone else if you're not financially secure." But old habits die hard. The very next week, Sarah called with tears in her voice. Her landlord was threatening eviction if she didn't catch up on 2 months of back rent. She needed $4,500 immediately, or she'd be homeless. My newly awakened financial awareness battled with decades of maternal instinct. What kind of mother lets her daughter become homeless? I transferred the money. Patricia was disappointed but not surprised when I told her. "Recovery from financial abuse is a process," she assured me. "The important thing is that you're starting to recognize the pattern. Change takes time." But time was something I felt I had less and less of. My arthritis was getting worse, making it difficult to climb the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment. My blood pressure medication had increased in dosage twice in the past year. The small aches and pains that I used to ignore were becoming harder to dismiss. I was getting older, more vulnerable, and more dependent on children who treated me like a human ATM. The breaking point came in late November, just before Thanksgiving. I was sorting through my mail, separating bills from junk, when I found an official-looking envelope from a finance company I'd never heard of. Inside was a loan document for $25,000, with my name listed as a co-signer alongside Sarah's. My hands started shaking as I read the terms. The interest rate was astronomical, nearly 30%. The monthly payments were $800. And there, at the bottom of the page, was my signature. Or what looked like my signature anyway. I stared at that document for a long time, my tea growing cold beside me, the afternoon shadows stretching across my small apartment. That wasn't my signature. Similar, yes, but not mine. The capital H in Helen was wrong. The loop in the R of Rodriguez was too big. Someone had forged my name, and I had a pretty good idea who. I called Sarah immediately. My voice was steadier than I expected when she picked up. "Sarah, I need to ask you about a loan document I received today." There was a pause, then a nervous laugh. "What loan document?" "One from Eastside Financial for $25,000 with my name as a co-signer." Another pause, longer this time. "Mom, I have no idea what you're talking about. You must be confused." "I'm holding it in my hands right now. It has your name and mine on it with what appears to be my signature." "Well, obviously it's a mistake. Identity theft happens all the time these days. You should report it to the police." Her casual dismissal made my blood boil. Identity theft. As if some random stranger had targeted me, rather than the daughter I'd given everything to. "Sarah, this isn't identity theft. This is forgery. And I think you know exactly what happened." "I can't believe you're accusing me of something like that." Her voice rose to a wounded pitch I'd heard many times before. "After everything I've done for you, everything I've sacrificed, you're going to accuse me of forging your signature? I'm hurt, Mom. Really hurt." The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I almost apologized. Almost. But the document in my hands was real, and my signature was fake, and no amount of wounded feelings could change those facts. "If you didn't forge my signature, then you won't mind if I have it examined by a handwriting expert. I said. The line went quiet. Then Sarah's tone changed completely, dropping the hurt act and turning ice cold. Do whatever you want, Mom, but don't come crying to me when you realize you're wrong. He hung up. I sat there holding the phone, listening to the dial tone, feeling something shift inside me like tectonic plates moving after decades of pressure. This wasn't just about money anymore. This wasn't even just about the forged signature. This was about respect, dignity, and the realization that I had raised children who saw me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I called a lawyer. The law office of Martinez and Associates was located in a modest building in the financial district, specializing in elder law and estate planning. The receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes and a reassuring smile, offered me coffee while I waited for my appointment. The coffee was terrible, but her kindness was genuine, and I felt some of the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. Attorney Maria Martinez was about the same age as Sarah, but where my daughter had become entitled and demanding, Maria radiated competence and compassion. She listened to my story without interruption, taking notes on a legal pad and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me with intelligent brown eyes. Mrs. Rodriguez, what you're describing is not only financial elder abuse but also fraud. Forging your signature on a loan document is a serious crime, regardless of who committed it. But she's my daughter, I said, the words feeling strange and hollow. I don't want to destroy her life over this. She made the choice to forge your signature, Maria replied gently but firmly. She destroyed the relationship herself. You're just deciding whether or not to protect yourself from further abuse. The word abuse kept coming up in conversations about my children, and each time it felt like a slap. I wasn't an abuse victim. I was a mother who loved her children and wanted to help them succeed, wasn't I? Maria walked me through the legal options. I could file a police report for fraud. I could dispute the loan and have my signature analyzed by experts. I could pursue civil charges for financial elder abuse. Each option felt like stepping off a cliff, abandoning the fiction that my family loved me unconditionally. What if I'm wrong? I asked. What if there's some explanation I'm not seeing? Maria's expression softened. Mrs. Rodriguez, in 30 years of practicing elder law, I've never seen a forged signature case that had an innocent explanation. Your daughter may try to convince you otherwise, but the evidence speaks for itself. I left the law office with a folder full of pamphlets about elder abuse, financial fraud, and victims' rights. The walk back to my apartment felt different somehow, like I was seeing the city with new eyes. The hustle and bustle that usually overwhelmed me seemed less threatening. The homeless man I passed every day outside the subway station nodded at me with what looked like respect, as if he recognized something in me that I was only beginning to see in myself. That evening, I called Michael to tell him about the loan document. His reaction was swift and predictable. Mom, you can't be serious. Sarah would never do something like that. Are you sure you didn't just forget signing it? Sometimes people our age have memory issues. People our age. Michael was 53. I was 70. But somehow he'd positioned us as peers dealing with the same age-related decline. It was masterful gaslighting, and it might have worked a year ago. But something had changed in me, something fundamental. My memory is fine, Michael. And my signature is distinctive enough that I'd remember signing a document for $25,000. Look, maybe Sarah used your signature because she knew you'd want to help her. Maybe she was just trying to save time, not commit fraud. Using someone else's signature without permission is the definition of fraud, whether there was malicious intent or not. Michael sighed heavily, a sound I'd heard countless times when he was annoyed with me for not going along with what he wanted. Mom, do you really want to tear this family apart over money? Is that the legacy you want to leave? The audacity of that statement took my breath away. I was the one tearing the family apart? I was the one making this about money? After decades of giving, sacrificing, and supporting them financially while receiving nothing but manipulation and guilt in return, I was the problem? Michael, this family started falling apart the day you and your sister decided I was more valuable as a bank account than as a mother. I'm not tearing anything apart. I'm just finally seeing clearly. The conversations with my children over the next few days followed a predictable pattern: denial, minimization, blame shifting, emotional manipulation. Sarah insisted the signature must be a mistake, then that someone else must have forged it, then that I must have signed it and forgotten. Michael suggested I was losing my mental faculties, that I was being paranoid, that I was destroying the family over nothing. But the person who surprised me most was my youngest grandchild, Emma. She was 19, Sarah's daughter from a relationship that ended when Emma was small. I'd helped pay for her daycare, her school supplies, her clothes, and eventually her college tuition at NYU. Unlike her older cousins, Emma had always been affectionate with me, calling regularly and visiting when she could. When she heard about the loan document from her mother, Emma didn't hesitate to call me. "Grandma Helen, I need you to know something. Mom has been bragging to her friends about how easy it is to get money from you. She even said she could probably get you to co-sign for things without reading them carefully." My heart stopped. "Emma, are you sure about this? I heard her on the phone with her friend Jessica last month. She was laughing about it. She said you'd do anything she asked because you were desperate not to be alone." Emma's voice cracked with emotion. "Grandma, I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner, but I didn't want to hurt you." The betrayal cut deeper than I'd thought possible. It wasn't just that Sarah had forged my signature, it was that she'd been planning it, joking about it, treating my love and desperation as a weakness to be exploited. It was that my own daughter saw me as such a pathetic figure that she could manipulate me without consequence. That night, I barely slept. I sat by my window, watching the city lights blur through my tears, thinking about all the years I'd spent believing that family meant unconditional love and support. I thought about Robert, who had tried to warn me about spoiling the children. I thought about Mrs. Chen, who checked on me during my illness simply because it was the right thing to do. I thought about Emma, who had risked her relationship with her mother to tell me the truth. And I thought about the woman I used to be, before decades of financial exploitation had worn me down to nothing. I used to be strong, independent, capable. I used to have opinions and boundaries and self-respect. Somewhere along the way, I'd traded all of that for the illusion of being needed by my children. The next morning, I did something that terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. I called Maria Martinez and told her I was ready to file a police report. The police station was nothing like the ones on television. It was beige and fluorescent and smelled like industrial disinfectant. The detective assigned to my case, a tired-looking woman named Detective Sullivan, took my statement with professional detachment. She photographed the loan document, had me sign affidavits, and explained the process for having my signature analyzed by handwriting experts. "Cases like this take time," she warned me. "And family members often close ranks against the victim. Are you prepared for that?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was prepared for anything. All I knew was that I couldn't continue living as a victim of my own children's greed. The investigation moved slowly, but my own transformation accelerated. For the first time in years, I started saying no to financial requests. When Sarah called asking for help with her electric bill, I calmly explained that I was no longer able to provide financial assistance while the loan investigation was ongoing. When Michael wanted money for his son's baseball equipment, I suggested he try a payment plan through the sporting goods store. Their reactions were swift and vicious. Sarah accused me of becoming cruel and vindictive in my old age. Michael suggested I was having a mental breakdown brought on by loneliness and confusion. Both of them threatened to cut me out of their lives entirely if I didn't drop the investigation and return to normal. Normal. As if there was anything normal about a 70-year-old woman living in poverty, while her middle-aged children enjoyed financial security funded by her sacrifices. But their threats didn't have the power they once did. Instead of panicking at the thought of losing them, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: relief. For the first time since Robert died, I went an entire month without transferring money to my children. For the first time in years, I had enough left over from my Social Security to buy fresh fruit, to get my hair done, to replace the worn-out blanket I'd been using since moving to the apartment. I started eating meals again instead of just snacking. I bought a small television for my bedroom so I could watch the morning news without Mrs. Chen's cats walking across the screen from next door. I even splurged on a subscription to Netflix, something I'd canceled years ago to save money for Sarah's emergencies. Small indulgences, but they felt revolutionary. The handwriting analysis came back after 6 weeks. The expert's report was unambiguous. The signature on the loan document was a forgery, and not even a particularly sophisticated one. Detective Sullivan called to inform me that they had enough evidence to press charges, but she wanted to give me one more chance to consider the implications. "Once we move forward with prosecution, there's no going back," she explained. "Your daughter will be arrested and charged with fraud. It will be a matter of public record. Your family relationships will never be the same." "Detective Sullivan," I said, "my family relationships haven't been the same for years. I'm just finally acknowledging it. The arrest happened on a Tuesday morning in December. I wasn't there to see it, but Sarah called me from the police station, her voice hysterical with rage and disbelief. "How could you do this to me?" she screamed into the phone. "I'm your daughter. How could you have me arrested?" "Sarah, I didn't have you arrested. You had yourself arrested when you forged my signature. This is insane. You've lost your mind. I'll fight this, and I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of mother you really are." She hung up, and I sat in my apartment, waiting to feel regret or guilt, or the crushing loneliness I'd been afraid of for so long. Instead, I felt something I barely remembered: peace. Michael called an hour later, his tone a mixture of fury and calculation. "Mom, you need to drop these charges right now. Do you have any idea what this is going to cost us in legal fees? Do you understand what this will do to Sarah's career? I understand that your sister committed fraud and actions have consequences. She's family. You don't prosecute family." "Michael, when did you and Sarah decide I was family? Because it wasn't when I was sick with the flu. It wasn't on my birthday. It wasn't when I needed emotional support or basic human kindness. I was only family when you needed money." The line went quiet for a long moment. Then Michael's voice turned cold and threatening. "If you don't drop these charges, don't expect to see your grandchildren again. We'll make sure you never have contact with any of us." The threat should have devastated me. 6 months ago, it would have sent me into a panic, begging for forgiveness and promising to make everything right. But I'd learned something important over the past few months. Being alone isn't the same as being lonely, and being with people who don't value you is lonelier than being by yourself. "Michael, you haven't let me see the grandchildren in over a year, except when you wanted something from me. You're not threatening to take away my family. You're just admitting that you never considered me part of yours." The court hearing was scheduled for a cold day in February. I woke up earlier than usual, choosing my outfit carefully. I wanted to look dignified, competent, like someone who deserved respect rather than pity. I settled on a navy blue dress I'd bought for Robert's funeral, paired with the pearl earrings he'd given me for our 25th anniversary. In the mirror, I looked like the woman I used to be: strong, put together, worthy of being taken seriously. The courthouse was intimidating, all marble and authority and echoing footsteps. Maria Martinez met me in the lobby, carrying a briefcase full of evidence and looking every inch the competent attorney I was grateful to have on my side. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. "I've been ready for months," I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Sarah was already in the courtroom when we arrived, flanked by her own attorney and looking smaller than I remembered. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup impeccable, her outfit chosen to convey innocence and vulnerability. She was playing a part, and she was good at it. When she saw me enter, her eyes filled with tears, and she mouthed, "Mom, please," across the room. For a moment, my resolve wavered. She looked so young, so fragile, so much like the little girl who used to collect leaves in Central Park. The maternal instinct that had driven me to sacrifice everything for my children rose up in my throat like bile, urging me to forgive, to forget, to make this all go away. But then I remembered Emma's phone call, revealing that Sarah had been bragging about manipulating me. I remembered the years of loneliness while my children enjoyed the lifestyle my sacrifices made possible. I remembered the casual cruelty of being dismissed and ignored except when they needed money. And I stayed in my seat. The prosecutor presented the evidence methodically, the forged signature, clearly different from my authenticated handwriting samples, the loan Sarah had applied for without my knowledge or consent, the pattern of financial requests that had escalated over the years into increasingly desperate demands, my savings account records showing transfer after transfer until my financial security was nearly exhausted. When it was time for Sarah to speak, she delivered a performance worthy of an Academy Award. She sobbed as she talked about how much she loved me, how she'd never intended to hurt me, how the signature must have been a mistake or misunderstanding. She claimed she'd been trying to protect me from the stress of co-signing, that she'd planned to pay back the loan without me ever knowing about it. "Your Honor," she said through her tears, "my mother means everything to me. She raised me to be independent and strong, and I thought I was showing her that by handling this on my own. I never meant for it to go this far. It was a beautiful lie, delivered with perfect emotion and just enough truth to sound plausible." Looking around the courtroom, I could see it was working. Several jurors looked sympathetic. Even the judge seemed moved by her apparent remorse. Then it was my turn to speak. I stood up slowly, my arthritis making the movement more difficult than it should have been, and walked to the witness stand. The courtroom fell silent as I was sworn in, and I could feel dozens of eyes watching me, waiting to see if I would cave under the pressure of prosecuting my own daughter. "Mrs. Rodriguez," the prosecutor began gently, "can you tell the court about your relationship with your daughter over the past few years?" I took a deep breath and began to speak. I told them about the years of financial support, the gradual escalation of demands, the loneliness of being valued only as a source of money. I described my forgotten birthday, my illness when no one came to help, the casual dismissal of my needs while my resources were systematically drained. As I spoke, I watched Sarah's face change. The tears dried up, replaced by something harder and more familiar. When I mentioned Emma's phone call about Sarah bragging to her friends, Sarah's attorney whispered urgently in her ear, but it was too late. The mask was slipping. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Sarah's attorney asked during cross-examination, "isn't it true that you willingly gave money to your daughter because you wanted to help her?" "Yes, I wanted to help her. But wanting to help someone and being manipulated into supporting their entire lifestyle are two different things." "But you could have said no at any time, couldn't you?" "Could I?" When someone's been conditioned to believe that their value depends entirely on their usefulness to others, saying no becomes very difficult. When you've been made to feel that your only purpose is to give money, refusing feels like refusing to exist. The lawyer pressed me harder, trying to paint me as a willing participant in my own exploitation, but I held my ground. Months of therapy with Patricia at the senior center had taught me to recognize and articulate the patterns of abuse I'd endured. The moment that changed everything came when Sarah herself took the stand in her own defense. She started with the same script she'd delivered earlier, all tears and remorse and promises to make things right. But when the prosecutor asked her about Emma's revelation regarding her conversations with friends, something snapped. "That's not fair," she shouted, her composure finally cracking. "I work hard for everything I have. I deserve help from my family. I deserve to have the life I want." The courtroom went dead silent. In those few sentences, Sarah had revealed more truth than hours of testimony had uncovered. She didn't see borrowing money from me as receiving help. She saw it as claiming what was rightfully hers. She didn't view my financial support as generosity. She viewed it as obligation. "I deserve it," she continued, her voice rising to a screech that echoed off the marble walls. "I'm her daughter. I deserve whatever she can give me." Her attorney was frantically trying to signal her to stop talking, but Sarah was beyond controlling. Years of entitlement and resentment were pouring out in a torrent of ugly truths. "She lived her life already. She had her chance. Now it's my turn, and I deserve everything she worked for." I sat in the witness gallery, watching my daughter reveal herself completely, and felt something I'd never experienced before. Not sadness or disappointment or even anger. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief that the pretense was finally over. When the judge asked if I had anything to add before sentencing, I stood up and walked to the front of the courtroom. In my hands was the family photo I'd carried in my purse for the past 3 years, the one taken at Emma's high school graduation. Sarah and Michael flanked me on either side, all of us smiling at the camera, looking like the perfect happy family. I held that photo up for everyone to see, then slowly, deliberately, tore it in half. The sound echoed through the silent courtroom like a gunshot. Sarah gasped as if I'd physically struck her. "Your Honor, for 70 years I believed that family meant unconditional love. I gave everything I had to my children because I thought that was what mothers were supposed to do. But I learned something important through this ordeal. Love should never be conditional on financial support. Respect should never have to be purchased. And family should never be a transaction." I looked directly at Sarah, her face streaked with tears and twisted with rage. "I will no longer buy love that isn't freely given. I will no longer accept crumbs of affection in exchange for my life savings. And I will no longer enable people who see me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited." The judge sentenced Sarah to 2 years probation and ordered her to pay restitution for the forged loan. It was a relatively light sentence, but I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking freedom. As we left the courthouse, Sarah's attorney approached Maria and me with a settlement offer. Sarah would admit wrongdoing and pay full restitution in exchange for having the conviction sealed from public records. It would protect her career and reputation, while still acknowledging the harm she'd caused. I looked at Maria, who nodded encouragingly. It was a fair offer, probably better than what we could expect from a prolonged legal battle. But I wasn't interested in what was fair or practical. I was interested in what was true. "No," I said simply. "The conviction stands as is. Actions have consequences, and those consequences shouldn't be hidden to protect someone's comfort." 3 weeks after the court hearing, when I thought the drama was finally over, Sarah staged one last manipulation. She appeared on my doorstep with Emma in tow, tears streaming down her face, begging for forgiveness and reconciliation. She'd lost her job, she claimed, because of the criminal conviction. She was facing eviction. She needed help getting back on her feet just one more time. "Mom, I know I made mistakes, but I'm your daughter. You can't just abandon me. Family forgives. Family helps each other through difficult times." It was a masterful performance, and I could see it was working on Emma, who looked torn between loyalty to her mother and the truth she'd revealed to me months earlier. Sarah had calculated this perfectly, using Emma's presence to add emotional weight to her plea and making it harder for me to refuse without looking heartless. For a moment, I felt the old familiar tug of maternal guilt and responsibility. Sarah did look genuinely distressed. She was facing real consequences for her actions, and part of me wanted to swoop in and fix everything, just like I'd always done. But then I remembered something Patricia had taught me at the senior center. Enabling isn't the same as helping, and protecting people from the consequences of their actions isn't love. It's fear, disguised as kindness. Sarah, I said quietly, I'm sorry you're facing difficulties, but they're the natural result of choices you made. I can't fix them for you, and I won't try. Please, Mom, I'm begging you. I'll pay you back. I'll do better. I'll change. I'd heard those promises before, dozens of times over the years. They'd always been lies, designed to buy time and access to my resources until the next crisis arose. But this time felt different. Not because Sarah had changed, but because I had. Sarah, I believe you think you'll change, but your actions over the past few years have shown me that our relationship is built on financial dependency, not genuine affection. Until you can value me for who I am, rather than what I can give you, we can't have a healthy relationship. She stared at me as if I'd become a stranger, which I suppose I had. The woman who had always said yes, who had always found a way to help, who had always put her children's needs before her own dignity, was gone. In her place was someone Sarah didn't recognize and couldn't manipulate. Fine, she said, her voice turning cold as the manipulation gave way to naked fury. But don't expect to see Emma anymore. Don't expect birthday cards or Christmas visits or phone calls. You've chosen money over family, and now you can live with that choice. She grabbed Emma's arm and started walking away, but Emma pulled free and ran back to me. Grandma Helen, I'm 19. She can't stop me from seeing you. She hugged me tightly and whispered, I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. I love you. As I watched them walk away, Sarah pulling Emma down the street with angry, determined steps, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Instead of the crushing loneliness and guilt I expected, I felt lighter. The weight of constantly worrying about my children's finances, of always being on call for the next emergency, of measuring my worth by their temporary satisfaction with my latest contribution. All of it was gone. That evening, I called Mrs. Chen and asked if she'd like to have dinner together. She appeared at my door 20 minutes later with a container of homemade dumplings and a bottle of wine she'd been saving for a special occasion. We ate and talked and laughed until nearly midnight. Two old women who had found friendship in the midst of loneliness. You look different, she told me as she prepared to leave. Stronger, more like yourself. I realized she was right. For the first time in years, I felt like myself. Over the next few months, I did things I hadn't done since Robert died. I joined a book club at the senior center, where I met other women who shared my love of mystery novels and afternoon tea. I started taking watercolor painting classes at the community college, rediscovering a talent I'd abandoned when the children were small and demanded all my attention. I bought new clothes that made me feel attractive rather than invisible. I got my hair styled at a proper salon instead of the cheap chain shop I'd been using to save money. I purchased a comfortable reading chair for my apartment and spent lazy Sunday afternoons reading novels I'd never had time for, when I was constantly managing my children's crises. Small changes, but they added up to something larger. A sense of purpose that had nothing to do with being needed by people who didn't value me. Emma visited regularly, usually on Sunday afternoons when her classes were finished, and her part-time job at the campus bookstore was closed. She never asked for money, never mentioned problems that needed my intervention. Instead, she brought stories about her courses, photos from her social media accounts, updates about her friends and romantic interests. She treated me like a person worth knowing rather than a resource worth accessing. Through Emma, I learned that Sarah had eventually found another job, albeit one that paid less and required a longer commute. Michael had stepped into the void left by my withdrawal of financial support, helping his sister with rent and utilities while complaining bitterly about the burden. The grandchildren I'd supposedly been cut off from hadn't even noticed my absence. They were too busy with their own lives to miss someone they'd rarely seen anyway. The realization that my absence had so little impact on their daily lives was both heartbreaking and liberating. I'd spent years believing I was indispensable to my children's happiness and survival, but the truth was that I'd been a convenience they'd taken for granted until it was no longer available. 6 months after the court hearing, I did something that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. I booked a trip to Chicago. I'd always wanted to visit Chicago, drawn by stories of its architecture and jazz clubs and deep dish pizza. But Robert had preferred beach vacations, and after he died, the children had discouraged me from traveling alone. It's not safe for a woman your age, Sarah had warned. What if something happens and you're all alone in a strange city? The irony wasn't lost on me that I was already alone, just trapped in an expensive apartment rather than exploring the world. The train ride from New York to Chicago was magical. I had a window seat and spent hours watching the landscape change from urban sprawl to farmland to small cities I'd never heard of. I ate meals in the dining car, chatted with fellow passengers, and felt more alive than I had in years. Chicago exceeded all my expectations. I stayed at a small hotel near Grant Park, within walking distance of the Art Institute and Navy Pier. I spent my days wandering through museums, sitting in jazz clubs, riding architecture tours on the Chicago River. I ate deep dish pizza and Italian beef sandwiches, and bought souvenirs I didn't need simply because they made me happy. But the best part of the trip wasn't the sightseeing or the food or even the sense of adventure. It was the realization that I could take care of myself, that I could navigate new places and solve small problems and enjoy my own company. For years, my children had convinced me that I was helpless without them, that I needed their protection and guidance to function in the world. The truth was exactly the opposite. They had been helpless without me. On my last night in Chicago, I sat in a jazz club called the Green Mill, listening to a saxophone player whose music seemed to speak directly to my soul. The room was full of people of all ages, couples and families and solo travelers like myself, all united by their appreciation for the music and the moment. I thought about Robert, who would have loved this place, and felt grateful for the years we'd had together. I thought about my children, and instead of anger or sadness, I felt something close to pity. They were so focused on what they believed they deserved that they'd never learned to appreciate what they actually had. But mostly, I thought about the woman I'd become over the past year. Stronger, more confident, more willing to demand the respect I deserved. I thought about Mrs. Chen and Emma and the friends I'd made at the senior center and book club, people who valued me for my conversation and companionship rather than my bank account. I was 70 years old, living on Social Security in a modest apartment in Manhattan, and I had never been happier. When I returned to New York, there was a voicemail from Michael waiting for me. His tone was careful, calculatedly casual, designed to sound like genuine interest rather than the prelude to a financial request I knew it was. "Hey, Mom, just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. Sarah mentioned you went on a trip? That sounds nice. Anyway, call me back when you get a chance. I wanted to run something by you." I deleted the message without calling back. 2 days later, another voicemail, this one more urgent. "Mom, I really need to talk to you. It's about Dad's life insurance policy. There might be some money we missed, but I need your signature on some paperwork. Call me as soon as you get this." I deleted that one too. The messages escalated over the next week, becoming increasingly desperate as Michael realized his usual manipulation tactics weren't working. By the final voicemail, he'd abandoned all pretense of caring about my well-being. "Mom, I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but this attitude needs to stop. We're your family, and you have obligations to us. Dad would be disgusted by how selfish you've become. Call me back immediately." Instead of calling Michael, I called Maria Martinez. "Is there any legal way they can access Robert's life insurance policy without my cooperation?" I asked. "Absolutely not," she assured me. "You're the sole beneficiary and have complete control over those funds." But I'm curious. Why are they suddenly interested in a policy that was settled 6 years ago? I explained about Michael's messages and his claim that there might be additional money to be distributed. Maria's laugh was not amused. "Mrs. Rodriguez, they're fishing. They've probably exhausted other financial resources and are hoping to convince you there's some unclaimed inheritance they can access. It's a common scam people run on elderly relatives. A scam. Run by my own son on his own mother." The audacity was breathtaking, but I was no longer surprised by anything my children might do. That evening, I sat down and wrote 2 letters. The first was to Sarah, the second to Michael. In each letter, I explained that I understood they were facing financial difficulties, but that I was no longer able or willing to provide monetary assistance. I wished them well in finding solutions to their problems, and hoped that someday we might be able to have relationships based on genuine affection rather than financial dependency. I mailed both letters the next morning, knowing they would likely be received with anger and accusations of abandonment. But I also knew that my own peace of mind was worth more than their temporary approval purchased with my life savings. The responses came within days. Sarah's letter accused me of becoming cruel and heartless in my old age, of betraying the sacrifices she'd made throughout her life to be a good daughter. Michael's was shorter but more vicious, claiming I was suffering from dementia and threatening to pursue legal guardianship if I didn't come to my senses. Neither letter contained any acknowledgement of the years of financial support I'd provided, any recognition of my own needs and feelings, or any indication that they valued me as a person rather than an ATM. They confirmed everything I'd already realized about our relationship. I kept both letters, not as weapons to use against them, but as reminders of how far I'd come and how important it was to maintain the boundaries I'd finally learned to set. A year after the court hearing, Emma graduated from NYU with a degree in social work. I attended the ceremony, sitting in the section reserved for family, wearing a new dress I'd bought especially for the occasion. Emma's face lit up when she spotted me in the audience, and she waved with genuine joy. Sarah and Michael were also there, sitting several rows behind me with their spouses and other children. I felt their eyes on me throughout the ceremony, but I didn't turn around or acknowledge them. This day belonged to Emma and her accomplishments, not to the family drama that had consumed too much of our lives. After the ceremony, Emma found me in the crowd and threw her arms around me. "Grandma Helen, I'm so glad you're here. This means everything to me." "I wouldn't have missed it for the world," I told her, meaning every word. As we walked together toward the reception, Emma linked her arm through mine. "You know, Mom keeps asking me to convince you to forgive her and go back to the way things were before." I wasn't surprised. Sarah had always used Emma as an intermediary when she wanted something but was too proud to ask directly. "And what do you tell her?" Emma smiled, an expression that reminded me of myself at her age, before decades of manipulation had worn down my confidence. "I tell her that you didn't break our family. You just stopped pretending it wasn't already broken." At the reception, I watched Emma celebrate with her friends and classmates, young people full of hope and possibility and dreams for the future. I thought about the money I'd spent on her education, money that had come from the sale of my house and Robert's life insurance and my careful savings over the years. But this felt different from all the other financial support I'd provided to my family over the decades. Emma's education was an investment in her future, not a band-aid for poor financial decisions. She'd worked hard, earned good grades, and shown genuine appreciation for the help she'd received. Most importantly, she'd never made me feel like supporting her education was an obligation or expectation. When the reception ended, Emma hugged me goodbye and promised to take me to dinner the following week to celebrate. As I watched her walk away with her friends, laughing and making plans for the future, I felt proud of the small role I'd played in her success. The subway ride back to my apartment gave me time to reflect on how much my life had changed. A year ago, I would have spent the day worrying about whether Sarah and Michael were angry with me for being there, whether I should approach them and attempt reconciliation, whether I was being too stubborn and unforgiving. Now, I simply felt grateful to have been included in Emma's special day, and looked forward to the quiet evening waiting for me at home. When I got back to my apartment, there was a bouquet of flowers waiting outside my door with a note from Mrs. Chen. "Congratulations on Emma's graduation. You raised good grandchild." The simple gesture touched me more than any expensive gift ever had. I put the flowers in a vase on my kitchen table and made myself a cup of tea, settling into my comfortable reading chair with a mystery novel I'd been saving for a quiet evening. Outside my window, the city hummed with its usual energy, but inside my small apartment, everything was peaceful. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I opened a bottle of wine Robert and I had been saving for a special occasion that never came, and I toasted my own transformation. To learning to value myself, to setting boundaries, to choosing dignity over desperation, to the realization that being alone isn't the same as being lonely, and that the people who truly matter will value you for who you are, not what you can give them. 2 years have passed since that courtroom confrontation that changed everything. Sarah eventually found stability with a new job that pays better than her previous position. Michael's business recovered, and his children graduated to the next phases of their education and activities. Both of my children learned to solve their financial problems without relying on transfers from their mother's dwindling savings account. They learned, in other words, to be adults. Emma finished her master's degree in social work and now counsels families dealing with elder abuse and financial exploitation. She says I inspired her career choice, that watching me find the courage to stand up for myself showed her how important it is to advocate for vulnerable people who have been conditioned to accept mistreatment. She visits every Sunday, bringing flowers or books or sometimes just her company. We cook meals together, watch old movies, and talk about everything and nothing. She never asks for money, never creates emergencies that require my intervention, never makes me feel like my value depends on my usefulness. She loves me simply because I'm her grandmother, not because I'm her benefactor. Mrs. Chen remains my closest friend and neighbor. Her cats have accepted me into their circle, and her homemade dumplings have become a weekly treat I look forward to. When she had a minor health scare last winter, I was the one who drove her to medical appointments and stayed with her during recovery. It felt good to be needed for the right reasons, to provide support without being exploited, to give care that was appreciated rather than expected. My apartment, once a symbol of downgraded expectations and financial limitation, has become a sanctuary. I've decorated it with artwork from local artists, filled it with plants that thrive in the east-facing windows, and created spaces for reading, painting, and entertaining the few people whose company I genuinely enjoy. I sleep well now, without the anxiety that used to keep me awake, worrying about which child would call with the next financial emergency. My arthritis is manageable with proper medication I can now afford because I'm not sending every spare dollar to support other people's lifestyles. I've gained weight in the best possible way, no longer subsisting on peanut butter sandwiches so that my children can enjoy restaurant meals funded by my sacrifices. My skin is clearer, my hair is healthier, and people tell me I look years younger than my actual age. Self-respect, it turns out, is the best anti-aging treatment available. My relationship with Sarah and Michael remains cordial but distant. We exchange Christmas cards and acknowledge birthdays with brief phone calls. They've stopped asking for money, perhaps because they've learned the answer will always be no, or perhaps because they've found other sources of support. I don't know, and I've stopped caring about the details of their financial lives. What I do know is that our relationship, such as it is, feels more honest now. There's no pretense of deep affection masking requests for financial support. There are no dramatic crises designed to trigger my maternal guilt. There are no elaborate manipulations intended to make me feel selfish for having boundaries. We are, finally, dealing with each other as adults rather than as parent and child locked in a dysfunctional pattern of giving and taking that benefited no one. Sometimes people ask me if I regret taking such a hard line with my children, if I miss the closeness we used to have. The question always makes me laugh, because it assumes we had closeness to begin with. What we had was dependency disguised as love, financial enmeshment masquerading as family bonds. Real closeness requires mutual respect, genuine affection, and the ability to value someone for who they are, rather than what they can provide. Those elements were never present in my relationships with Sarah and Michael, no matter how much money changed hands between us. I don't miss the anxiety, the guilt, the constant worry about their next crisis. I don't miss feeling like a failure as a mother every time I couldn't solve their problems with my checkbook. I don't miss the loneliness of being surrounded by people who saw me only as a resource to be mined until exhausted. What I have now feels like genuine family, even though it's smaller than what most people would recognize. Emma, Mrs. Chen, my friends from the book club and painting class, the woman who cuts my hair and remembers my preferences without my asking, the man who runs the corner deli and always saves me the good apples. These people see me, value me, appreciate my company without expecting anything in return except my friendship. They've created a chosen family that feels more authentic than the biological one I spent decades trying to please. Last month, I did something that would have terrified me 3 years ago. I took another trip, this time to New Orleans, traveling alone and staying in a charming bed and breakfast in the French Quarter. I spent my days exploring art galleries and antique shops, my evenings listening to jazz and intimate clubs that reminded me of my magical night in Chicago. On my last night there, I sat on a wrought iron balcony overlooking Royal Street, sipping a glass of wine and watching tourists and locals alike enjoy the warm evening air. A street musician was playing saxophone below, his music drifting up through the humid air like a prayer. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who would have spent this evening worrying about whether her children were angry with her, whether she should have bought more expensive souvenirs, whether taking this trip was too selfish when there were always family emergencies requiring her attention. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood that self-care isn't selfishness, that boundaries aren't cruelty, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable people who are perfectly capable of solving their own problems. I raised my glass of wine to the New Orleans sky, full of stars barely visible through the city lights, and made a toast to the future. To more trips, more adventures, more evenings spent in my own company without feeling guilty or lonely. To the radical act of choosing myself after 7 decades of choosing everyone else first. When I returned to New York, there was a message waiting for me from an unexpected source. My oldest grandson, Michael's son David, who I hadn't spoken to since before the court hearing. He was now 22, graduated from college, and working his first real job in marketing. "Grandma Helen," his voice said through the phone. "I know it's been a long time since we talked, and I know there's been some family drama I don't fully understand. But I wanted you to know that I've been thinking about you, and I'd love to take you to lunch sometime if you're interested. No agenda, no drama, just spending time together because I miss you." His message surprised me. David had always been polite but distant, more interested in his phone than conversation during the brief family gatherings I'd attended over the years. I'd assumed he shared his father's view of me as a difficult old woman who'd become unreasonably stubborn about money. I called him back and agreed to meet for lunch at a restaurant near his office in Midtown. When I saw him waiting for me at the table, I was struck by how much he'd changed. No longer the awkward teenager I remembered, but a confident young man who stood up to greet me with a genuine smile. "Grandma, you look great," he said, and I could tell he meant it. I love what you've done with your hair. We talked for 2 hours, and I learned things about David I'd never known despite decades of birthday presents and Christmas visits. He was passionate about environmental causes, volunteered at an animal shelter on weekends, and had recently started dating a woman he described with obvious affection. More importantly, he seemed interested in me as a person. He asked about my trip to New Orleans, my painting classes, my book club recommendations. He listened to my answers with attention and follow-up questions that showed he was genuinely engaged in our conversation. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said over dessert. "Dad says you and Mom had some kind of falling out over money, and that you've become really stubborn and difficult in your old age. But talking to you today, you seem happier and more confident than I remember. What really happened?" I considered how much to tell him. He was Michael's son, and anything I said might get back to his father. But David was also an adult who deserved to make his own judgments about family relationships. "David, the short version is that I spent many years using my money to solve problems for your father and your Aunt Sarah, and they came to expect that support as their right, rather than appreciating it as help I chose to give. When I decided I needed to keep some financial security for myself, they weren't happy about it." He nodded slowly, processing this information. That makes more sense than Dad's version. "He's been complaining about money constantly since Mom went back to school for her master's degree. I always wondered why he didn't just ask you for help like he used to." "He did ask. I said no." "Good for you," David said, surprising me with his directness. "I love my parents, but they've never been great with money management. I always thought it was weird how they seemed to have this safety net that never ran out." As we left the restaurant, David hugged me goodbye and promised to call soon. "I'd like to do this regularly if you're interested," he said. "I feel like I'm just getting to know my grandmother for the first time." Walking back to the subway, I reflected on how different this interaction felt from the family relationships I'd grown accustomed to. David had sought out my company without expecting anything in return. He'd shown interest in my life and opinions. He'd treated me like a person worth knowing rather than a problem to be managed. It gave me hope that not all family relationships were doomed to repeat the patterns of exploitation and resentment I'd experienced with his father and aunt. 3 weeks later, David called to invite me to his girlfriend Amanda's birthday party. It was a casual gathering at their shared apartment in Brooklyn, nothing fancy, but he wanted me to meet her and some of his friends. I almost said no. Social gatherings with people decades younger than me often left me feeling out of place and awkward. But something in David's voice convinced me that this invitation was genuine, not motivated by obligation or guilt. The party was exactly as advertised: casual, friendly, and filled with young people who treated me with the same courtesy they showed each other, rather than the patronizing kindness often directed at elderly relatives. Amanda was delightful, a kindergarten teacher with a quick wit and obvious affection for David. But what touched me most was watching David interact with his friends. He was kind, thoughtful, and generous in ways that had nothing to do with money. When one friend mentioned struggling to find an affordable apartment, David offered to help with the search. When another was stressed about a job interview, he provided encouragement and practical advice. He had learned to be helpful without being exploited, generous without being taken advantage of. Somehow, despite growing up in a family that confused money with love, he'd developed healthy relationship skills that his father never mastered. As the evening wound down, Amanda pulled me aside. "I'm so glad David reconnected with you," she said. "He talks about you all the time, about how proud he is of your independence and strength. You're nothing like the bitter old woman his father made you out to be." Bitter old woman. So that was how Michael described me to his family, as someone who'd become unreasonably difficult rather than someone who'd finally learned to protect herself from financial abuse. The characterization hurt, but it also confirmed that I'd made the right choice. People who truly cared about my well-being would have celebrated my newfound independence, not resented it. That night, lying in bed in my small apartment, I thought about the different paths my family relationships had taken. Sarah and Michael, trapped in patterns of entitlement and resentment, unable to see past their own wants to recognize my needs. David and Emma, somehow managing to break free from those patterns and build connections based on genuine affection rather than financial dependency. It gave me hope for the next generation and for the possibility that family relationships could be healthy, mutual, and nurturing when built on the right foundation. The seasons changed, and I celebrated my 72nd birthday surrounded by people who chose to be there. Mrs. Chen made her famous dumplings. Emma brought flowers and a bottle of wine. David and Amanda came with a homemade cake and stayed to play board games until late in the evening. No one asked for money. No one treated my birthday as an obligation to be endured. No one made me feel like I should be grateful for their presence or guilty for taking up their time. They celebrated me simply because they cared about me, And I realized this was what family was supposed to feel like. As I write this, it's been almost 3 years since that courtroom confrontation that changed the trajectory of my life. The forged loan document that initially seemed like the worst betrayal of my life turned out to be a gift, the catalyst that finally opened my eyes to patterns of abuse I'd been too afraid or too conditioned to recognize. Sarah paid back the money from the fraudulent loan and successfully completed her probation. She's built a stable life for herself without relying on financial support from others. Michael has learned to live within his means, rather than depending on transfers from his mother's savings account. Both of them are healthier for having been forced to develop actual adulting skills. Emma graduated with her master's degree and now works for a nonprofit that provides legal advocacy for elderly victims of financial abuse. She says, "I taught her that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, never too late to demand the respect you deserve." David has been promoted twice at his marketing job and recently moved in with Amanda, who has become like a granddaughter to me. They visit regularly, include me in their social plans, and treat me like family in all the ways that actually matter. Mrs. Chen remains my dearest friend, though her health has declined slightly with age. I help her with grocery shopping and medical appointments, and she still brings me homemade soup whenever I have the sniffles. We take care of each other in the way families should, with mutual respect, genuine affection, and voluntary support rather than obligation and resentment. My book club has become a source of intellectual stimulation and friendship I never expected to find at my age. We read everything from mysteries to memoirs to literary fiction, and our discussions are lively and engaging. Several of the women have become close friends outside the club structure, and we often attend cultural events together around the city. My painting classes have evolved from hobby to passion. I've sold several small pieces at local art fairs and donated others to charity auctions. The act of creating something beautiful with my own hands feels like a form of meditation, a way of expressing feelings and experiences that don't translate easily into words. Most importantly, I've learned to enjoy my own company. The loneliness that once drove me to accept any crumbs of attention from my children, regardless of the cost to my dignity or financial security, has been replaced by contentment with solitude. I can spend entire days alone without feeling empty or abandoned. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely, just as there's a difference between being family and being related. I spent decades confusing those concepts, accepting loneliness disguised as togetherness, tolerating exploitation disguised as love. Now I understand that the people who truly matter will value you for who you are, rather than what you can provide. They'll show up during illness and celebration alike. They'll remember your birthday without being reminded. They'll offer support freely, rather than treating every interaction as a transaction. They'll see you as a person worthy of respect, not as a resource to be depleted. I wish I could tell my younger self, the woman who worked double shifts to pay for her children's education and then watched them take that sacrifice for granted, that self-love isn't selfish, that boundaries aren't cruel, that sometimes the most caring thing you can do for people is refuse to enable their dysfunction. But perhaps that woman wasn't ready to hear those truths. Perhaps she needed to experience decades of exploitation and manipulation before she could recognize her own worth. Perhaps the journey itself, as painful as it was necessary to reach this place of peace and self-acceptance. I look around my small apartment now, filled with artwork and books and plants and mementos from my travels, and I see not the downsized life of an abandoned elderly woman, but the carefully curated sanctuary of someone who finally learned to choose quality over quantity in relationships. The photo on my mantle shows Emma's college graduation, with David and Amanda flanked by Mrs. Chen and me, all of us smiling genuinely at the camera. It's a smaller family than the one I started with, but it's infinitely more authentic. Sometimes late at night when the city is quiet and I'm reading in my comfortable chair with a cup of tea nearby, I think about that woman who used to lie awake worrying about her children's finances, wondering if they were angry with her, calculating how much she could afford to give them before her own security was threatened. That woman was generous to a fault, loving to the point of self-destruction, devoted beyond all reason. She deserved better than she got from the people she sacrificed everything for, but she also deserved better than she gave herself. She deserved to believe in her own worth, to demand respect rather than begging for affection, to understand that love shouldn't require bankruptcy of the soul or the bank account. I'm grateful to have become someone who knows these things, even if it took 7 decades to learn them. The sunset through my apartment window is particularly beautiful tonight, painting the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and pink. I raise my glass of wine to that sunset, to the journey that brought me here, to the woman I've become, to the radical discovery that being alone doesn't mean being lonely, and that the family you choose can be more authentic than the one you were born into. to the understanding that sometimes you have to lose everything you think you need to find everything you actually deserve. I think about the years ahead, the adventures still waiting, the relationships yet to be built, the art yet to be created. At 72, I'm not winding down. I'm just beginning to live authentically. And that feels like the greatest victory of all. The question I want to leave you with is this. Have you ever given so much of yourself to others that you forgot your own worth? Have you ever confused being needed with being loved, or mistaken exploitation for family loyalty? Maybe you're living this story right now, watching your resources drain away while your emotional needs go unmet, telling yourself that this is what love looks like. Maybe you recognize the patterns I described in your own family relationships. If any of this feels familiar, I want you to know that it's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to set boundaries, to demand respect, to walk away from relationships that diminish rather than enhance your life. The people who truly love you will understand and adapt. The people who don't will reveal themselves through their resistance to your growth. Either way, you'll be better off knowing the truth. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you experienced financial exploitation within your family? Have you struggled to set boundaries with people who claim to love you while treating you poorly? Your story might help someone else find the courage to choose dignity over desperation. If this video resonated with you, please like it and subscribe to my channel. It helps me continue sharing these difficult truths that someone needs to hear. Together, we can break the silence around elder abuse and family exploitation, one story at a time. Remember, you deserve to be valued for who you are, not what you can give. You deserve relationships built on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. You deserve to live with dignity, regardless of your age. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is finally learn to love yourself enough to demand better. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps you write your own ending, one filled with self-respect, authentic relationships, and the peace that comes from knowing your own worth.